Hello, my name is Caitlin Clark. I am a student of English. I want to share how I learned to think in English without stopping to translate. I used to pause in every sentence. I used to think in my native language, and then change each word into English. I had to work very hard to speak fluently. I felt slow. I felt frustrated. I knew there had to be a better way. I began to explore simple steps. I began to experiment with techniques that would make my brain work directly in English. I began to see the beauty of thinking without translation. I remember the first time I tried to read an English book while listening to its audio version. I sat in a quiet room. I opened the book and pressed play on the audio. I tried to follow along. My brain was very busy. It had to listen and see the words at the same time. I did not stop to think of each word in my language. I did not pause. I let my mind absorb the sound and the look of the words. I did not worry if I missed a few details. I simply trusted the flow. Slowly, my brain got used to this busy state. I learned that when I keep my mind busy, I do not have time to translate. I learned that overloading my brain helped me to think directly in English. I began to listen to long audios, too. I picked an audiobook that played for a long time. I let it run in the background while I did my chores. I listened carefully. At first, I struggled to understand every word, but after some time, I noticed something wonderful. My brain began to work on its own. I started to understand the story without translating each word in my head. I began to feel the language. I began to feel that the English words were making sense all by themselves. This long listening technique slowly removed the habit of translation from my mind. I also discovered a simple yet powerful trick. I started to describe what I saw around me. I would sit on a bench in the park. I looked at a man walking his dog. I looked at the trees and the sky. I then said in my mind, or even out loud, I see a man with a dog. The dog is running. The sky is blue. I used only the words I already knew. I did not try to think of the translation. I simply spoke what I saw. This exercise of forced description made me focus only on the English words. I forced my brain to use what it had already learned. I did not look for new words from my native language. I kept my sentences short and clear. Over time, I noticed that I was not pausing to translate. My words came naturally. I was learning to think in English. There was also another method I tried. I called it shadowing. I sat in front of my computer. I played a short video in English. I listened carefully. When the speaker paused, I repeated what was said. I copied the tone and the speed. I spoke out loud. At first, it felt awkward. I stumbled over the words. I felt self-conscious. But I did it again and again. With every repetition, my mouth learned the sounds. My brain learned to keep up with the pace. I was not thinking in my own language. I was simply echoing the English. I learned that shadowing helped me to stop translating. I learned that by speaking the words right after I heard them, my mind did not have the time to change them into my native language. It was a natural flow. My confidence grew as I practiced more and more. I remember one day when I learned a new word. The word was dump truck. I had never heard it before. Instead of trying to think of its translation, I decided to picture it. I closed my eyes. I imagined a big truck carrying a load of dirt. I saw the truck in my mind. I connected the word dump truck with that picture. I did not think of its translation. I did not think of any other word. I simply saw the image and said, dump truck. This method of visualization became very powerful. Every time I encountered a new word, I would search for a picture in my mind. I would let the image connect with the sound of the word. Soon, I began to remember the words by the pictures they created. I did not have to translate. My mind learned to make direct connections. I also decided to change another habit. I used to rely on a bilingual dictionary. I would look up a word and see its translation side by side. That made my mind depend on the translation. I realized that if I wanted to think in English, I had to stop that habit. I switched to an English-only dictionary. I looked up words and read definitions in English only. I learned the meanings from simple explanations. I had to think in English to understand. At first it was hard. I had to learn new words by reading definitions that I did not know. But slowly, my vocabulary grew. I learned that I did not need my native language to understand a word. I could trust the explanation in English. My brain started to think in English automatically. I felt that my fluency was getting better every day. I also practiced repetition. I read the same passage many times. I listened to the same audio again and again. Each time I noticed that my understanding grew. My brain became more familiar with the sounds and the meanings. Repetition made the words stick. I did not need to translate every time. I began to see the pattern of the language. I learned that if I repeated a lesson many times, my mind would eventually absorb it naturally. The habit of translation began to fade away. I started to rely on my memory of the words. I started to think in English without any extra steps. My journey to think in English became even more real when I traveled. I went to a country where people spoke only English. I stayed with a host family. In the morning, my brain was still waking up. I struggled to answer simple questions. I would think, "What did I have for breakfast?" and then translate in my mind. It felt slow, but as the day passed, my mind switched gears. I talked with my host family. I talked with the locals. I began to think directly in English. By the end of the day, I even dreamed in English. One morning, I woke up and realized that my first thoughts were in English. That was a huge milestone. It meant that my mind had finally learned to work without translating. I was living the language. I was feeling it in every moment. After my trip, I decided to keep the habit alive. I made small rules for myself. I switched my phone to English. I changed my computer settings. I even read fun magazines in English. Every non-study material was now in English. I told myself that if I was not studying, I would still consume English. I watched movies without subtitles. I listened to music and read the lyrics. I began to fill my day with English. This constant immersion forced my brain to work in English all day long. I began to think about my plans, my feelings, and my experiences in English. It was a gradual change, but it made a huge difference. My confidence grew. I no longer felt the heavy pause of translation in my conversations. I learned that speaking out loud was another important step. I started to speak about everything I did. When I made breakfast, I would say, "I am making toast. I am pouring orange juice." When I went to work, I would say, "I am heading out. I am going to meet my friend." These simple sentences helped me to form thoughts in English. I did not worry if they were very short or simple. The goal was to use English directly. I spoke to myself in the mirror. I spoke in my car. I even spoke while I walked. Every little sentence built my habit. I found that when I spoke out loud, my mind did not have time to translate. I was simply expressing what I felt and saw. This exercise gave me the courage to join conversations with others. I learned that the more I practiced speaking, the easier it became to think in English. I also started using images to remember words. I made small flashcards with a picture on one side and the English word on the other. I looked at the picture and said the word out loud. I did this whenever I had a free moment. Sometimes I carried a small notebook with images drawn from magazines. I would look at a picture of a bus, a tree, or a building and say, "Bus, tree, building." I repeated these exercises every day. Soon, I no longer needed to think about the translation. The words came to me naturally with the images in my mind. This technique helped me to build a mental library of English words connected directly to their meanings. I learned to embrace repetition. I read the same short story many times. I listened to the same podcast episode on several days. With each repetition, the words became easier. I started to remember phrases without thinking of the translation. I noticed that the more I repeated a sentence, the more comfortable I felt saying it. I began to record my voice. I listened to myself speak. I compared my recordings from one week to the next. I could hear that my sentences were flowing faster. I felt a sense of progress. Each repeated exercise built my confidence. I did not feel the need to pause and translate anymore. My brain had learned that repetition was the key to natural speaking. I also began to change my surroundings to help me think in English. I changed the language on my smartphone. I set my social media accounts to English. I started to watch YouTube videos in English without looking at the subtitles. I read news articles from English websites. Everywhere I looked, I saw English. This constant exposure helped me to immerse myself in the language. I did not have time to think in my native language. I began to see English as a natural part of my daily life. I learned that when you surround yourself with English, you start to live in it. My mind slowly started to absorb the language, and the habit of translation began to vanish. Sometimes I had moments of frustration. I would sit at my desk and feel that my mind was still holding on to old habits. I would feel that I was not making progress fast enough, but I learned to be patient. I told myself, every day, I speak a little more English. Every day, I think a little more in English. I learned that growth happens slowly. I learned to celebrate small victories. When I managed to speak a whole sentence without pausing, I felt proud. When I understood a whole conversation without translating, I felt happy. I learned that every moment of progress, no matter how small, was important. I kept a journal. Every night, I wrote down a few sentences in English about my day. I wrote, "Today I spoke with a friend. Today I read an article. Today I watched a movie in English." Even if the sentences were short, they showed me that I was moving forward. That journal became a record of my success. I also discovered that I could learn from my mistakes. There were times when I still translated in my head. I would catch myself and then remind myself of the techniques I had learned. I started to see these moments as opportunities. I learned to laugh at my errors. I learned that mistakes were just stepping stones. I told myself, it is okay to make mistakes. It is okay to not be perfect. Every mistake helps me learn. With that attitude, I found that I became more relaxed. I did not worry as much about the exact translation. I focused on the meaning of what I wanted to say. I started to use simpler words and phrases. I did not try to use complicated grammar if I was not sure. I kept it simple and clear. I reminded myself that the goal was communication, not perfection. There was a time when I joined a language exchange group. I met people who were also learning English. They shared their struggles with translation. We practiced together. We played simple language games. We described objects around us in English. I remember one day, we all stood in a circle and took turns saying one sentence about what we saw. I said, "I see a red apple." A friend said, "I see a blue car." Another friend said, "I see a green tree." It was fun and simple. We all learned from each other. We encouraged one another to speak without translating. That group became a safe place for me to practice. I learned that when you practice with others, you feel less alone in your struggles. You see that everyone has the same challenges. And when you work together, you can help each other grow. I also began to use technology in new ways. I started to watch English lessons online that focused on natural conversation. I listened to podcasts where the speakers talked about everyday life. I joined online forums where people shared tips on learning English. I found that many others had struggled with translation too. I read their stories. I learned that I was not the only one who had to work hard to think in English. Their successes inspired me. I began to see that there were many paths to fluency. I tried different techniques. I experimented with shadowing, forced description, visualization, and repetition. I did them all. I found that each technique added a piece to the puzzle. Over time, my mind began to build the habit of thinking directly in English. One day, I decided to take a bold step. I challenged myself to have an entire day without any translation. I woke up and told myself, "Today, I will think only in English." I set my alarm to English. I planned my day in English. I wrote a simple to-do list. I will eat breakfast. I will go to work. I will speak with my friends. I walked the day with these simple sentences in my head. At first, it was hard. I found that I sometimes slipped into my native language. But I caught myself and corrected the habit. I forced myself to continue in English. By the end of the day, I felt a deep sense of accomplishment. I had lived an entire day in English. That day taught me that I could choose to think in English. It taught me that every day is a new opportunity to build fluency. I kept experimenting with my methods. I tried naming every object in my house in English. I went room by room. I said, "This is a sofa. This is a lamp. This is a table. This is a chair." I repeated these sentences until I could say them without thinking. I made it a habit every morning. I even played a game with myself. I would look around and try to name as many things as possible in English. I challenged myself to beat my record. I learned that this simple exercise was fun and effective. It trained my brain to connect everyday objects directly with their English names. Sometimes I would practice in front of a mirror. I would say, "I am happy. I am learning. I am growing." I looked at my own eyes and repeated the sentences. I smiled at myself. I reminded myself that it was okay to be simple. I reminded myself that every word I spoke was progress. I learned to be kind to myself. I learned that learning a language is a long journey. I learned that every small step was worth celebrating. I celebrated the days when I managed to speak a full sentence without hesitation. I celebrated the days when I understood a movie without pausing. I celebrated every little victory. I began to see that thinking in English was not just about the words, it was about the feelings behind them. I started to describe my emotions in simple terms. I would say, "I feel good. I feel excited. I feel calm." I did not worry about complex adjectives. I kept it simple. I reminded myself that it was okay to express myself in a straightforward way. I learned that the more I described my feelings in English, the more natural it became. I began to feel that my emotions were part of the language. I began to see that English was not just a subject I studied. It was a way of life. There were many days when I felt like giving up. I felt tired. I felt overwhelmed. I had days when I thought, "I have been trying for so long, and I still translate in my head." But then I remembered the progress I had made. I remembered the days when I did not pause. I remembered the conversations that flowed smoothly. I remembered the moments when I dreamed in English. I knew that every day of practice added up. I knew that even if some days were hard, the next day would bring new strength. I learned to be persistent. I learned to trust that my hard work would pay off. I learned that perseverance was the key to real fluency. I also learned to use context to my advantage. I read simple stories. I listened to conversations where the context made the meaning clear. I learned that many English words have more than one meaning. I learned to use the situation to decide what the word meant. For example, the word left can mean a direction or the past form of leave. I learned that by listening carefully and by looking at the overall picture, I could understand the meaning without translating. I practiced this by reading short paragraphs and then summarizing them in my own words. I learned that context is a friend. I learned that the more I understood the context, the less I needed to translate. I began to see that my journey was not only about words, it was about living a different way of thinking. I started to see my day in English. I thought of my morning routine in simple terms. I said, I wake up. I brush my teeth. I eat breakfast. I thought of my work in simple phrases. I said, I go to work. I speak with my colleagues. I solve problems. I began to narrate my life in English. I noticed that by doing this, my thoughts became quicker. I did not have to pause to translate. They came naturally. I felt that my mind was shifting. I felt that English was becoming a part of me. I also took time to listen to native speakers. I watched movies and TV shows. I listened to music in English. I repeated the phrases I heard. I paid attention to the rhythm and the melody of the language. I learned that every language has its own music. I learned that English has a natural flow. I learned to dance to that flow. I imitated the sounds. I practiced the intonation. I practiced until my own speech matched the natural cadence. I learned that speaking like a native does not happen overnight, but it comes with steady practice. I learned that every day of listening and speaking improved my fluency. There was a day when I decided to record myself. I set up my phone and began to speak about my day. I talked about the weather, the people I met, the food I ate. I spoke slowly and clearly. Later, I listened to the recording. I noted every pause and every moment of hesitation. I listened and learned. I repeated the process the next day. I recorded again. I compared the recordings. I could hear that my sentences were coming out faster. I could hear that the pauses were shorter. I learned from that feedback. I learned that recording my voice was a powerful tool. I learned that by hearing my own voice, I could adjust my speech. I learned that every improvement, no matter how small, was a victory. My journey was full of simple moments. I remember a time when I was at a bus stop. I looked around and named everything. I said, I see a bus. I see a bench. I see a tree. I repeated the words in my head. I did not think of their translations. I just saw the objects and said their names. I learned that even these small moments added up. I learned that the habit of thinking in English was built on many tiny steps. I learned that every moment counted. I also learned the importance of keeping a journal. Every night before I went to sleep, I wrote down a few sentences about my day in English. I wrote, "Today I spoke with a friend. Today I watched a movie in English. Today I learned new words." I kept the sentences short. I kept them simple. I did not worry about fancy grammar. I just wrote what I felt. Over time, I looked back at my journal. I saw my progress. I saw that I was speaking more freely. I saw that I was thinking in English more and more. My journal became a record of my journey. It reminded me that every day was a chance to improve. I practiced speaking with native speakers whenever I could. I joined online groups and participated in video calls. I introduced myself simply. I said, "Hello, my name is Ariel. I am learning English." I listened to their replies. I answered with simple sentences. I did not worry about mistakes. I learned that native speakers were kind. They smiled at my effort. They encouraged me to speak more. I learned that real conversations were full of small pauses and corrections. I learned that communication was more important than perfection. I learned to relax and enjoy the conversation. I took risks every day. I challenged myself to speak even when I was afraid. I knew that each time I spoke without translating, I grew stronger. I remember a day when I was in a busy cafe. I felt nervous because I wanted to join a conversation at a nearby table. I gathered my courage and walked over. I said, "Hello, how are you?" in a clear voice. The people around me smiled and responded. That small act of courage made my heart beat fast with excitement. I realized that I was making progress. I realized that my brain was learning to operate in English. I learned that the world was friendly to those who try. I made a rule for myself. I decided that every morning I would wake up and think in English. Even before I got out of bed, I would plan my day in simple English sentences. I would say, "Today I will eat breakfast. Today I will go to work. Today I will meet my friends." I repeated these words in my head. I let them guide me through the day. I learned that starting the day in English set a positive tone. I learned that it was a promise to myself that I would not revert to my old habits. I learned that with every morning, I was building a stronger foundation. I also learned that it was okay to speak like a child. I did not have to use big words or complex sentences. I learned that simple language was effective. I said, "I am happy. I like the sun. I see a blue sky." I repeated these simple sentences. I realized that when I used simple words, my thoughts came out quickly. I did not hesitate. I did not have to pause to find the right word. I learned that simplicity was a strength. I learned that every child starts with simple sentences. I learned that by speaking simply, I was growing naturally. I tried many new exercises. One day, I set a timer for 5 minutes. I told myself, "For the next 5 minutes, I will speak only in English." I started speaking about whatever came to my mind. I talked about the weather, the room, my plans, and my feelings. I did not stop. I did not check my native language. I let the words come out in a steady stream. When the timer went off, I felt a sense of freedom. I had spoken continuously. I had not paused to translate. I felt that my English had grown stronger. I learned that short bursts of pure English were very helpful. I repeated this exercise every day. I also began to practice with images. I would take a photo of something around me, a tree, a building, a pet, and then I would describe it in English. I would say, "This is a big tree. The tree has green leaves. The tree is tall." I did this every time I took a picture. I learned that by connecting an image with words, my mind did not have the time to translate. I learned that the picture helped me remember the English word directly. I learned that each image was a small lesson. I learned that every photo was a chance to think in English. I changed my daily routine in small ways. I began to set reminders on my phone in English. I set an alarm that said, "It is time to speak in English." When the alarm went off, I paused for a moment and then repeated a few sentences out loud. I said, "I am ready to learn. I am ready to speak. I am ready to think in English." I repeated these words until I felt energized. I learned that little cues in my day helped me stay in English mode. I learned that each reminder was like a friendly nudge from my future self. I explored many online resources. I found websites and videos that focused on natural conversation. I learned that there were many people who had the same goal. I read their blogs, I listened to their podcasts, and I followed their advice. I learned that the journey to fluency was shared by many. I discovered tips like naming objects, repeating phrases, and keeping a journal. I learned about shadowing and forced description. I learned about visualization and immersion. I took notes and practiced each tip in my own way. I learned that every idea was useful. I learned that all these methods combined made my English stronger. I remember a time when I was listening to a friend speak. I noticed that he did not pause at all. His words came out smoothly. I asked him, "How do you speak so fast?" He smiled and said, "I do not translate in my head. I think in English." His words made a deep impression on me. I realized that I could learn to do the same. I asked him for advice. He said, "Practice every day. Listen to English. Speak English. Live in English." I took his advice to heart. I made a promise to myself that I would try my best every day. I knew that it would not be easy. I knew that it would take time, but I also knew that each small step would lead to a big change. I began to see improvements slowly. I noticed that when I had a conversation with a native speaker, I was not as hesitant. I found that my sentences came out faster. I could understand the conversation without pausing to translate. I felt that I was growing confident. I started to join group conversations online. I participated in video chats. I challenged myself to answer questions quickly. I learned that every conversation was a lesson. I learned that with each conversation, I was building a mental habit of thinking in English. I learned that speaking was like riding a bicycle. At first, it was hard and you might fall. But with practice, you learn to ride smoothly. I learned that English was like that bicycle. I learned to ride it with confidence. I also learned that sometimes translation is useful. When I encountered a very difficult word, I would sometimes look it up. But I learned to do this sparingly. I learned that it was important to trust my own understanding. I learned to use an English-only dictionary. I learned that when I had to look up a word, I should read its definition in English. I learned that this helped me connect the word directly to its meaning. I learned that my reliance on translation would gradually shrink if I did this. I learned that translation is a tool for beginners. I learned that as you grow, you must let it go. I began to study phrases instead of individual words. I learned that language is not a collection of isolated words. I learned that words are used in groups. I listened to native speakers and noticed how they used certain phrases. I practiced saying those phrases. I repeated them until they became natural. I learned that this helped me speak more fluidly. I learned that by learning in chunks, I did not need to piece together each word. I learned that the whole phrase would come to me in one go. I learned that phrases have their own rhythm and flow. I learned that this was the secret to natural conversation. My journey was filled with many little exercises. I remember one day when I set a goal to name every object in my kitchen in English. I walked around and said, "This is a refrigerator. This is a stove. This is a sink. This is a table. This is a chair." I repeated the names until I could say them without hesitation. I learned that the more I practiced, the faster my brain connected the words with the objects. I learned that my mind was beginning to see the world in English. I learned that every object, every moment, was an opportunity to think in English. I also started to train responses to common questions. I practiced simple replies like, "I am fine, thank you." I practiced saying, "I am good." I rehearsed these responses until they became automatic. I knew that when someone asked, "How are you?" I would not hesitate. I would answer quickly and confidently. I learned that these simple responses helped me to build momentum in conversation. I learned that by having default answers ready, I reduced the need for translation. I learned that these small phrases were the building blocks of fluency. I began to see that learning a language is like building a house. Each day, I laid a small brick. Each brick was a sentence. Each brick was a phrase. Slowly, the structure grew stronger. I learned that every day of practice was a day of progress. I learned that even if I did not notice big changes, the small improvements added up. I learned that consistency was the key. I learned that every time I spoke, every time I listened, I was building a future where my mind would think directly in English. I took on challenges and recorded my progress. I would set aside time to have a 5-minute conversation with myself every day. I would talk about my plans. I would say, "I will go to work. I will meet a friend. I will have a good day." I would record these sentences and listen back. I would see that over time, my pace improved. I would notice that I spoke more confidently. I learned that by tracking my progress, I could see how far I had come. I learned that every day was a chance to become better. I also learned the importance of being in an environment that supports your goal. I joined online communities of learners. I participated in discussions where English was the only language spoken. I shared my experiences and listened to others. I learned that when you surround yourself with people who share your goal, you feel encouraged. I learned that their stories inspired me to keep going. I learned that a community of learners is like a family that supports you through every challenge. I learned that you are never truly alone on this journey. Sometimes I felt overwhelmed by the number of techniques I had to try. I felt that there were too many rules to remember. But then I would remind myself that the goal was simple: think in English. I did not have to master every technique overnight. I only had to practice a little bit each day. I learned that it was okay to start small. I learned that every technique was a tool in my toolbox. I learned that as long as I kept trying, I would eventually find my own way. I learned that the journey was personal and unique. I began to see the world in a different light. I noticed that when I thought in English, my view of the world changed. I started to see details I had never noticed before. I saw the beauty in simple things. I noticed how the sun shone through the leaves of a tree. I heard the laughter of children playing in the park. I described these moments in simple English sentences. I said, "The sun is bright. The leaves are green. The children are laughing." I learned that these simple observations helped me to connect with the language. I learned that English was not just a subject to study, but a way to experience life. I remember a day when I went to the market. I walked through the aisles and looked at the fresh fruits and vegetables. I said, I see apples. I see bananas. I see carrots. I talked to the vendors in simple English. I asked, how much is this? I listened to their replies. I thanked them with a simple, thank you. I learned that real-life situations were the best teachers. I learned that by practicing in everyday life, I could build my fluency naturally. I learned that each conversation, no matter how short, added to my learning. I also started to embrace the discomfort of making mistakes. I knew that every error was a chance to learn. I learned that it was okay to say something wrong. I learned that native speakers understood that I was still learning. I learned that mistakes were a natural part of the process. I told myself, it is okay if I make mistakes. I am learning. I will do better next time. I learned that by accepting my imperfections, I could speak more freely. I learned that the fear of making mistakes was the biggest barrier to fluency. I learned to let go of that fear. I remember a moment when I was on a video call with a native speaker. I was nervous. I felt my old habit of translating creeping in. But then I took a deep breath and simply spoke. I said, I am happy to talk with you. I am learning English, and I am getting better. The conversation went on naturally. I did not stop to think of every word. I listened carefully. I replied quickly. I felt the natural rhythm of the conversation. I learned that in real life, you do not have the luxury of translating. You must speak as the words come. I learned that this spontaneity was the true mark of fluency. I started to appreciate every small victory. I appreciated the days when I could think in English without a pause. I appreciated the days when I could join a conversation and be understood. I appreciated every moment when my mind worked faster and my words flowed naturally. I began to celebrate these moments. I learned that every success, no matter how small, was a step toward a bigger goal. I learned that by celebrating progress, I could motivate myself to keep going. I began to use every resource I could find. I read books written in simple English. I watched videos that explained English in a clear and simple way. I joined online classes where teachers used simple words and short sentences. I learned that when the language is presented in a simple and clear manner, it is easier to absorb. I learned that I did not need to be bombarded with complicated grammar or difficult vocabulary. I learned that simplicity was key. I learned that every word, every sentence, built the foundation of my fluency. I also practiced listening in a different way. I sat quietly and listened to the sounds around me. I tried to identify the different noises. I listened to the hum of a refrigerator. I listened to the chatter of people outside. I listened and then described these sounds in English. I said, I hear a car. I hear people talking. I hear birds singing. I learned that by practicing my listening skills in this simple way, I could train my brain to understand English without needing to translate. I learned that the world was full of sounds that could teach me the language. I explored many creative ways to practice. I started to write short stories in English. I wrote about my day, my dreams, and my hopes. I wrote simple stories that described a place, a person, or an event. I did not worry about perfect grammar or fancy vocabulary. I just wrote what I felt. I learned that writing in English helped me to organize my thoughts. I learned that the more I wrote, the more naturally the language began to come to me. I learned that writing was a mirror of my thoughts. I learned that when I wrote in English, I was thinking in English. There were times when I watched movies without subtitles. I turned off the subtitles even if I felt unsure. I listened carefully. I tried to understand the plot from the tone, the actions, and the expressions. Sometimes I missed a word or two, but I did not let that stop me. I trusted that the overall story would be clear. I learned that movies were a great way to practice. I learned that even if I did not understand every word, I could still feel the emotion of the scene. I learned that language was not just about words, but about feelings and expressions. I remember one night when I could not sleep. I lay in bed and thought about my day in English. I recapped each moment in simple sentences. I said, "Today I walked in the park. I talked with a friend. I ate a good meal. I did this for a long time. I let my mind wander in English. I discovered that sometimes my thoughts flowed best when I was relaxed. I discovered that even in the quiet of the night, my brain could work in English. I learned that thinking in English was not a task, but a way of life. I also began to use technology to challenge myself. I set up language games on my computer. I played word puzzles and simple quizzes in English. I joined online challenges where I had to speak on a given topic in English. I recorded my voice and then shared it with friends who were also learning. They gave me feedback. I listened to their advice and practiced more. I learned that these challenges were fun and engaging. I learned that they helped me to break the habit of translating in my head. I learned that every game, every challenge, was an opportunity to practice. I began to create a routine that was full of English. I made a schedule. I set aside a specific time each day to speak, listen, and write in English. I stuck to this schedule, even on weekends. I learned that consistency was the key to success. I learned that every day, no matter how busy, was a chance to practice. I learned that if I did a little bit every day, the results would show. I learned that small daily habits built a strong foundation for fluency. I took a step further and began to think about my future in English. I imagined the day when I would speak effortlessly. I imagined the day when I would join meetings, travel to new countries, and make friends with native speakers, all without pausing to translate. I saw that future clearly in my mind. I believed it. I worked toward it every day. I knew that every sentence I spoke, every moment I thought in English, was a step toward that dream. I learned that believing in yourself is as important as practicing. I learned that a positive mindset makes the journey easier. I challenged myself to remove every crutch of translation. I deleted translation apps from my phone during my practice time. I avoided switching back to my native language when I was studying. I told myself, I will use only English now. I even removed books in my native language from my study area. I filled the space with English books, magazines, and posters. I surrounded myself with the language. I learned that when you remove the safety net of translation, you force your brain to work in the target language. I learned that this could be uncomfortable at first, but it made me stronger over time. I also experimented with speaking with my inner voice. I began to have small conversations with myself in English. I talked about my plans. I talked about my worries. I talked about my hopes. I did this every morning and every night. I learned that by talking to myself, I could practice without the pressure of a conversation with others. I learned that this self-talk was like a rehearsal. I learned that it prepared me for real conversations. I learned that every internal dialogue built my confidence. I started to notice the small changes. I noticed that I no longer felt the need to translate when I read a sentence. I noticed that my comprehension of spoken English had improved. I noticed that I could reply quickly to questions. I began to feel that my thoughts were coming faster. I felt that I was living in English. I felt that the language had become a part of me. I learned that it is the result of many small habits and persistent practice. I learned that over time, the habit of translation fades away. I learned that my brain had made the switch. I remember a moment when I was with a group of friends. We were having a lively conversation in English. I did not pause or hesitate. I did not check in my head for a translation. I simply responded with simple words and phrases. I felt free. I felt confident. I felt that I was truly a part of the conversation. I saw that my friends were smiling and nodding. I saw that I was understood. That moment was a turning point for me. I knew that I had achieved something special. I knew that I was no longer held back by the need to translate. I continued to build on these successes. I made a promise to myself. Every day, I would take one small risk in English. I would speak to someone new. I would try a new exercise. I would record a new story in my journal. I would watch a movie without subtitles. I would name every object in a new room. I learned that each risk, each challenge, was an opportunity to grow. I learned that even if I made mistakes, I was moving forward. I learned that progress was built on small steps taken consistently over time. I also started to integrate English into my hobbies. I began to watch cooking videos in English. I listened to sports commentary in English. I read articles about my favorite music in English. I learned that when you use English in things you enjoy, it becomes more natural. I learned that you begin to associate fun and interest with the language. I learned that the more you enjoy it, the less you feel the need to translate. I learned that passion for a subject makes the language come alive. I learned that when English is part of your hobbies, it is easier to think in English. I practiced with every tool available. I watched English lessons on YouTube. I read blogs written in simple English. I listened to podcasts where the speakers explained their ideas in clear terms. I joined social media groups where people shared their English learning journeys. I participated in online challenges. I learned that every resource added a new piece to my puzzle. I learned that by using many sources, I was exposed to different ways of speaking and thinking. I learned that this diversity enriched my understanding and made my brain more adaptable. I also started to use creative methods. I wrote poems in English. I tried to tell jokes in simple sentences. I even wrote short dialogues as if I were acting in a play. I allowed myself to be creative and playful with the language. I learned that creativity was a wonderful way to overcome the habit of translation. I learned that when you create something new in English, you force your brain to think directly in the language. I learned that every creative act was a victory. My journey was not without challenges. There were many days when I felt tired. There were days when I felt that my brain was still slow. I sometimes worried that I would never reach the point of thinking directly in English, but I kept going. I reminded myself that every moment of practice was valuable. I reminded myself that every day I was getting a little bit better. I learned that the process of learning a language is long, but it is filled with moments of joy and discovery. I learned that even when progress seems slow, every word, every sentence builds a stronger future. I began to see that thinking in English changed my entire outlook. I became more open-minded. I started to understand different cultures better. I saw that language is not just about communication, it is about connection. I realized that when you think in English, you can connect with people from all over the world. You can share your ideas, your feelings, and your dreams without a filter. I learned that the world became smaller and friendlier. I learned that by thinking in English, I was stepping into a global community. I learned that every conversation was a chance to build bridges. I also learned the value of reviewing my progress. I would go back to my old recordings and read my early journal entries. I marveled at how far I had come. I saw the days when I hesitated. I saw the moments when I paused to translate. I saw the errors I had made. And I saw the steady progress that led to fewer mistakes and smoother speech. I learned that looking back gave me strength to move forward. I learned that every challenge was overcome by persistence. I learned that I had the power to change, one simple sentence at a time. I remember a special moment when I spoke with a native speaker about my journey. I said, I used to translate every word in my head. I used to pause and think in my native language, but now I speak directly in English. The native speaker smiled. He said, You have done something very important. You have freed your mind. His words filled me with pride and hope. I learned that my hard work was visible to others. I learned that my journey could inspire someone else. I learned that by sharing my story, I could help others overcome the same struggles. I learned that language learning is not a solitary journey. It is a shared path. I continued to push myself further. I set new goals. I decided that I would spend 1 hour every day in complete English immersion. I turned off all notifications in my native language. I listened to English music. I read English news. I even thought about my dreams and aspirations in English. I learned that the more I surrounded myself with English, the more natural it became. I learned that every hour of immersion was a step closer to true fluency. I started to see that the habit of translating slowly disappeared. I no longer needed to stop in my head. I no longer needed to search for the right word in my native language. I began to trust my own instincts. I learned that if I did not know a word, I could use context or a synonym. I learned that it was okay to ask for clarification. I learned that communication was about getting the message across, not about using perfect words. I learned that every time I chose to speak without translating, I was proving to myself that I could do it. I learned that the freedom to speak came from trusting my own ability. Every day, I made a conscious effort to think in English. I noticed that in the morning, before I got out of bed, my mind already started to form thoughts in English. I planned my day, I thought about what I wanted to achieve, and I did it all in simple English sentences. I learned that these small morning routines set the tone for the entire day. I learned that by starting in English, I could maintain that habit throughout the day. I learned that the key to long-term change was to build consistency. I challenged myself to have one day a week where I would only speak English. I told my friends and family about this challenge. I explained that on that day, I would try not to use my native language at all. It was hard at first. I struggled with familiar situations. I had to ask questions in simple English. I had to explain myself in short sentences. But by the end of the day, I felt a sense of freedom. I felt that I had conquered a piece of my old habits. I learned that these special days were like a training camp for my mind. I learned that they prepared me for real-life conversations. I began to see that every method I tried contributed to a larger change. I did not rely on one single technique. I combined many approaches. I listened. I spoke. I wrote. And I thought. I practiced with images, with flashcards, and with simple recordings. I challenged myself to describe everything I saw. I listened to native speakers and repeated after them. I immersed myself in English in every possible way. I learned that by combining these methods, I could build a powerful habit. I learned that fluency is not about one magic trick. It is about many small, consistent actions. I came to understand that my journey was ongoing. I knew that even though I had made great progress, there was always room to improve. I continued to seek out new ways to challenge myself. I enrolled in online courses. I joined discussion groups with people from different countries. I took part in webinars and virtual meetups. I learned that every new interaction was a chance to practice. I learned that every conversation, no matter how brief, added to my experience. I learned that language is a living thing that grows with every word you speak. I also began to pay attention to pronunciation. I listened carefully to how native speakers pronounced simple words. I practiced the sounds until they felt natural. I learned that sometimes the sound of a word can give you clues about its meaning. I practiced by saying, "Computer, computer." I repeated until the sound was smooth. I learned that focusing on pronunciation helped me to lock in the words in my mind. I learned that when you hear the correct sound, it is easier to recall the word without translation. I learned that every little sound mattered. There were moments when I would feel frustrated by the slow pace of progress. I would think, why is this so hard? Why can't my mind switch? But then I reminded myself that every journey takes time. I reminded myself that every step, no matter how small, was progress. I learned that the key was to keep practicing and never give up. I learned that every day of practice was an investment in my future. I learned that in time, my mind would grow stronger and the habit of translating would vanish completely. I began to see that thinking in English was not a destination, but a process. It was something that I built day by day. I learned to appreciate the little moments when my mind worked directly in English. I learned to be proud of every sentence I spoke without a pause. I learned that fluency was a journey filled with challenges and triumphs. I learned that each challenge I overcame made me more confident. I learned that every mistake was a lesson that brought me closer to my goal. I often sat by my window and watched the world go by. I listened to the sounds of the city, the distant hum of cars, the chatter of people on the street. I thought in English about everything I saw. I said, "The sky is clear. The streets are busy. People are smiling." I felt that by simply observing the world in English, I was training my brain to work naturally in the language. I learned that every observation, every thought, was a small piece of the puzzle. I learned that by paying attention to the world around me, I could build a stronger connection to English. I made sure to incorporate fun into my practice. I played word games. I joined online challenges that made me laugh and think at the same time. I read simple stories that entertained me. I watched funny videos in English and then tried to repeat the jokes in my own words. I learned that when you enjoy what you are doing, learning becomes easier. I learned that fun and play are powerful tools in building language skills. I learned that laughter can break down the barriers of hesitation and self-doubt. I also found that sharing my journey with others was very important. I started a blog where I wrote about my daily practice. I shared my struggles and my successes. I received kind messages and useful tips from fellow learners. I read their stories and realized that we were all on the same path. I learned that the community of learners is strong and supportive. I learned that by sharing my experiences, I could help others overcome their fears. I learned that every story matters, and that every voice adds to the richness of our shared journey. I took time to reflect on how much I had grown. I looked back at the days when I would stop to translate every word. I remembered the long pauses and the moments of self-doubt. I marveled at how far I had come. I saw that my English was now full of life. I no longer felt constrained by my native language. I felt that English was my own. I learned that growth comes from stepping out of your comfort zone and taking risks. I learned that every risk I took, every word I spoke, was a step toward becoming a fluent speaker. As time passed, my life became more intertwined with English. I began to dream in English. I started to think of my goals, my hopes, and my dreams all in one language. I woke up one morning and realized that my mind had changed. I no longer needed to translate in my head. My thoughts flowed naturally in English. I felt that I had unlocked a new part of myself. I learned that language is not just a tool for communication, it is a way of experiencing life. I learned that when you think in English, you see the world differently. You see the world with fresh eyes and a new heart. Every day I continued to work on my English. I knew that the journey was long, but I also knew that every day was a new opportunity. I set new goals for myself. I promised to try one new technique every week. I kept a list of ideas that I wanted to try. I reminded myself to speak out loud, to listen carefully, and to never let the habit of translating return. I learned that discipline and persistence are the keys to long-term success. I learned that every day, no matter how challenging, was a chance to grow. I began to see that thinking in English was not just a skill, it was a new way of being. I became more confident. I became more open. I became a better communicator. I learned that the habit of translating had once held me back. I learned that now my mind was free. I felt the joy of spontaneous conversation. I felt the pleasure of understanding a movie without pausing. I felt the satisfaction of writing my thoughts in clear, simple English. I learned that every moment of freedom was a gift. I learned that every moment of clear thought was a victory. I want you to know that you can do this too. You can break free from the habit of translating in your head. You can learn to think in English. Start small. Name the objects around you in English. Describe your day in simple sentences. Listen to English songs and repeat the words. Use an English-only dictionary. Record yourself speaking. Celebrate every little improvement. Do not be afraid of mistakes. They are part of the journey. Every time you speak, every time you listen, you are building a new habit. Your mind is like a muscle. With practice, it will grow stronger. With time, you will think in English naturally. Remember, it is a journey that takes time. Every day, each moment matters. Every simple sentence you speak is a step forward. Every moment you think in English is a victory. The journey is long, but it is filled with joy and discovery. The more you practice, the more confident you become. The more you listen, the more you learn. The more you speak, the freer you feel. Your voice matters. Your thoughts matter. You deserve to speak English without hesitation. Now I challenge you. I challenge you to try something new today. Look around you. Name each object in English. Speak out loud. Think about your plans for the day in simple English. Write a few sentences in your journal. Make a promise to yourself that you will practice every day. Even if it is just for a few minutes, every minute counts. You are building a habit that will change your life. Your journey to fluency is one step at a time. Trust yourself. Trust your ability. Trust that your mind will learn to flow in English naturally. Imagine the day when you no longer pause to translate. Imagine the day when you can have a full conversation without a hitch. That day is coming. Every effort you put in today brings you closer to that goal. Every small step builds a bridge to fluency. Every time you decide to think in English, you are investing in your future. You are telling your mind that it is time to change. You are telling your mind that it is time to let go of old habits. And with that, your English will become a part of who you are. I have shared my journey with you. I have told you my struggles and my successes. I have given you the techniques that helped me. Now, it is your turn to take these ideas and make them your own. Start with simple actions. Start with a quiet moment. Let your mind absorb English without the need for translation. Let your thoughts be free. Embrace the new habit. Embrace the journey. Embrace the growth. As you move forward, remember that every day is a chance to improve. There will be challenges. There will be moments when you feel stuck. But do not worry. These moments are part of the process. When you feel frustrated, take a deep breath and repeat your simple sentences. Remind yourself that every small step is progress. Remind yourself that you are capable of thinking in English. Keep practicing. Keep believing. Keep moving forward. Today, you have the tools. Today, you have the techniques. Today, you have the simple exercises that can transform your thinking. Overload your mind with English. Immerse yourself in the language. Speak out loud. Visualize new words. Use an English-only dictionary. Repeat and reread until the words become second nature. Each of these actions, done with persistence, will change the way your brain works. Soon you will find that the pause for translation is gone. Your thoughts will flow naturally, and your speech will be confident and clear. I want you to take a moment now. Close your eyes if you like. Picture yourself in a conversation with ease. Picture your mind flowing freely in English. See yourself in a busy cafe, speaking with friends. Hear the natural rhythm of your words. Feel the joy of spontaneous conversation. That is the power of thinking in English. That is the freedom that comes when you let go of translating in your head. Your journey starts now. Every day, take a small step. Name an object. Speak a sentence. Write a short paragraph. Listen carefully to the voices around you. Let English become part of your life. With time, you will see the transformation. Your mind will learn to work directly in English. Your words will flow, and you will no longer be held back by old habits. I believe in you. I believe that you can do this. I know that it is not easy, but I also know that every step you take is a victory. Remember, you are building a new way of thinking. You are learning to see the world in a different language. You are breaking free from the habit of translating. And with each day, you are one step closer to speaking English fluently and naturally. Keep this lesson in your heart. Remember the simple exercises. Remember the moments of success. When you feel doubt, recall the times when your words flowed without a pause. When you feel frustrated, remember that every effort counts. And when you speak, do so with pride and confidence. You are on a journey to unlock the full power of your mind. You are on a journey to let English be your voice. Today, I leave you with this thought. Every word you speak in English is a victory. Every sentence that comes out naturally is a sign of progress. The journey may be long, but the rewards are priceless. You will gain not only fluency in English, but also a new way of seeing and experiencing life. You will become part of a global community that connects through language, and you will discover that the freedom to speak and think in English is within your grasp. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Thank you for taking the time to learn and grow. I hope that the techniques I have shared will help you to break the habit of translating in your head. I hope that you will find joy in every moment of practice. I hope that you will see the progress in your own life. Remember, every day is a new opportunity. Every moment is a chance to speak, to listen, and to live in English. Now, go forward with confidence. Embrace the challenges and celebrate the victories. Let your mind be free. Let English be your language of thought. And always remember that every small step you take is a giant leap toward fluency. Your journey to think in English has begun. Keep practicing, keep believing, and soon you will see that you no longer need to translate in your head. You will simply speak from your heart, directly in English, and the language will become a natural part of you. I believe in you. I trust that with time, your mind will learn to work in English naturally. I know that your voice will shine and that you will express your true self with clarity and ease. Your journey is unique, and every step is yours. Embrace it with determination and passion. Speak in simple words, think in simple sentences, live in English. Now, as you finish this lesson, I want you to take a deep breath and feel the freedom in your heart. Let this moment be the start of a new way of thinking. Let this moment be the turning point where you choose to leave behind the habit of translation. Your mind is powerful. Your journey is important. And every word you speak in English is a testament to your strength and perseverance. Keep practicing. Keep speaking. Keep dreaming in English. The world awaits your voice. Thank you for listening. Thank you for learning. And thank you for taking the brave step toward thinking in English without hesitation. Your journey is just beginning, and every day you move forward is a victory worth celebrating. And so, with every new sunrise, let your mind wake up in English. Let your day begin with simple words, and let your thoughts flow as freely as the wind. Imagine your future filled with conversations, laughter, and the natural ease of speaking English. This is your new life. This is your journey. And with each passing day, you will find that the habit of translating in your head is a thing of the past. Embrace the new you. Embrace the language that connects the world. Now, let us continue this journey together. Let every conversation be a celebration of progress. Let every simple sentence be a stepping stone to fluency. Let every moment in English remind you that you are capable of so much more. Your journey is long and filled with promise. With each word spoken, you build the life you desire. With each thought formed in English, you unlock new opportunities. And with each small victory, you realize that the world is yours to explore. Remember, you are not alone on this path. There are many who have walked before you, and many who walk with you now. Share your stories. Listen to the stories of others. Learn from every experience, every mistake, and every success. The journey to fluency is one of many shared moments, of connections made through simple words and genuine communication. Let these moments inspire you to keep going. Every day, choose to speak in English. Every day, choose to let your thoughts flow freely without the burden of translation. Every day, build a habit that strengthens your mind and opens new doors. Your journey is not measured by how fast you speak, but by how deeply you connect with the language. So take your time, enjoy the process. Let every day be a celebration of the power of language and the beauty of human connection. I know that sometimes the road may seem long and the obstacles many, but remember, every challenge you face is an opportunity to grow. Every hesitation is a chance to learn. And every time you push through the urge to translate, you build a stronger, more fluent version of yourself. Embrace those challenges. Cherish the small victories. And above all, keep your heart open to the endless possibilities that come with thinking in English. Your journey to fluency is like a long and winding road. There will be twists and turns, ups and downs, but each step brings you closer to the freedom you seek. With each passing day, your mind will learn to operate in English without the constant need to pause and translate. You will find that the language will begin to flow naturally from your thoughts, from your emotions, and from your very being. And that, my friend, is the true magic of learning a new language. So now, as you step into your day, carry these lessons with you. Let every moment be a chance to practice. Let every conversation be a window into a world where you are free to express yourself fully and naturally. Trust in your ability. Believe in the process. And always remember that every word you speak in English is a step toward a brighter, more connected future. Thank you for joining me on this long and rewarding journey. Thank you for daring to dream in English. Thank you for letting your mind be free. Your voice is powerful. Your thoughts are valuable. And as you continue to speak, think, and live in English, you will discover that the habit of translating in your head will fade away into memory, replaced by the natural, effortless flow of true fluency. Go forth with confidence. Speak with clarity. Think with freedom. And let every simple sentence be a building block in the magnificent structure of your English fluency. Your journey has just begun, and the possibilities are endless. Enjoy every step, every challenge, every triumph. For in the end, you will not just speak English, you will live it. Every time you decide to speak, every time you choose to think in English, you are writing a new chapter in your story. Your story is unique. Your story is filled with struggles and triumphs, with challenges overcome and victories celebrated. With every simple sentence, you become more fluent. With every short, clear phrase, you become more confident. And with every moment spent in English, you unlock a new part of your potential. Let your journey be a testament to your courage, your determination, and your love for language. In the quiet moments, when you are alone with your thoughts, let English be your companion. Let it fill your mind with beautiful expressions and vivid images. Picture the world in a new light, where every color, every sound, every sensation is described in the language of your dreams. Let the words come naturally, like the rhythm of your heartbeat. Embrace the simplicity of your thoughts. Speak slowly, but confidently. And always remind yourself that each day your mind is growing stronger, more agile, and more attuned to the music of English. There will be days when the journey seems endless, when the path is steep and the obstacles numerous. But remember, even the longest journeys are made up of tiny, deliberate steps. Every day, take one more step. Every day, speak one more sentence in English. Every day, let your mind work in the language that connects you to the world. And soon you will find that the heavy weight of translation is gone, replaced by the lightness of free expression. Keep your focus on the goal. Keep your heart open to the beauty of language. Keep practicing and never lose sight of the dream of fluency. For in that dream lies the power to transform your life. You will build bridges with your words. You will create connections that span cultures and continents. You will share your ideas, your stories, your soul with the world in a language that is vibrant, expressive, and alive. And that is the true reward of learning to think in English. Now let these words be a beacon for you. Let them guide you on days when you feel lost. Let them remind you that every moment of practice is a moment of progress. Let them encourage you to push forward, even when the path seems difficult. For every word you speak, every thought you form in English, is a building block of a future filled with possibility and promise. As we end this long lesson, take a deep breath and smile. Smile at the journey you have undertaken. Smile at the progress you have made. Smile at the fact that you are learning to think in English, directly, freely, and joyfully. The road ahead is bright. The language is waiting for you. And with every simple sentence, you are closer to the freedom of fluent expression. Thank you for listening. Thank you for learning. Thank you for taking this journey with me. Your mind is powerful. Your journey is unique. And together, we will continue to speak, think, and live in English. Every day is a new beginning. Every sentence a new hope. Go forward, speak clearly, think freely, and let the beauty of English fill your world.